In terms of, you said that a lot of the problem came from within your own party and the people who you were negotiating for at the negotiating. How did you get them on your side? Because we had something similar happen here in 2008. There was an initial agreement, the MOA AD. It was negotiated, ready for signing, and then the Constitution was challenged. So it was the second part, and it was declared unconstitutional. In this case, the negotiators on the Philippine government side obviously didn't bring, it was fighting similar to the challenge you faced. How did you deal with it?
Well, with regard to the internal one, it's really quite simple. I just had a long conversation with the party activists, and we would regularly have meetings, which would be with party activists, and we would do this in a structured way.
Yes.
They would all start with me giving a very short introduction of where we are now, what the challenges are, and then I would take questions. And the longest time I was on my feet was 2.5 hours.
Wow.
So it was a long conversation that was
Yes.
taking place within the party structures. I just didn't have a focus or a way in which I could reproduce that long conversation with the electorate. And in that long conversation with the electorate, there were too many discordant voices coming in as well.
So the peace process is actually quite disjointed for different segments of society.
Yes, and you get the same disjunction between one issue, one strand of what you're dealing with another, because what you're dealing with is a whole series of strands over a broad spectrum.
Yes.
And it's the same here as there.
When you're in the process of the negotiation itself, how important are the personalities involved? For example, the trust you build up with your counterpart in Sinn Féin, or with part of the reason I'm asking this is because on our part now, the man who negotiated the peace agreement for the Philippine government is now a candidate for the Philippine Supreme Court. We're still in the process of negotiations. We have a framework agreement in place, but how difficult would it be when the people who have gained trust are replaced? How important are the personalities to a negotiation for peace?
Well, remember, nobody is indispensable.
Agreed.
No matter where you are, what the situation, nobody is indispensable. Replacing some is more difficult than replacing others, but it can be done. Trust is overstressed in this, because if you're depending on trust, if you're thinking it's a matter of developing trust, then you could find your trust being abused. It's a question of doing business, whether you have people that you can do business with. And then, the other bigger question is whether the parties who are engaged in the process are still trying to seek a victory over other people, or whether they're seeking an accommodation. Now that I think is the crucial issue.
Yes.
And part of the reason why it took us so long to get an agreement was that there were significant parties who were seeking victory over the other rather than being prepared to have an accommodation. And it was only when people, and indeed the last to come on board with this were, the Republican movement itself was the one before the last to come on board with terms of pulling their sights down to working out an accommodation rather than seeking a victory. And indeed, in some respects, I think it was not until after the agreement that the Republican movement got down onto the same field as a level playing field with ourselves.
Incredible. How do you go through this transition process when, after you signed the agreement, you were dealing with people who carried out terrorist attacks?
Yeah, well, it actually was easier after the agreement.
Really? Well, I guess it's true, right? They stopped. How do you get them to the agreement? And then how do you change the mindset of people who see them as terrorists?
Well, the second one is, in some cases, only time will do that. You can't make people change their minds. And sometimes you need time. I think actually part of the reason why our own process at the full implementation of it took so long was the time it took for people to accommodate their minds, to get their heads around the fact that these people have changed, have moved away from where they were, and are now in a position where they ought to be treated the same way as any other group of people involved in politics. Some people take a lot longer than others to get accustomed to that, and I think there isn't anything else you can do about it. There's no point haranguing them, no point trying to push them where they're reluctant to go. In fact, trying to do that is counterproductive. But what educates people eventually is the realities are there. And the reality is that the other is not going to go away, and if you're going to have to find a way of living with the other, and this accommodation that we reached, in the Belfast Agreement, which I think you probably have here in the Framework Agreement, is something that is going to be there,
yes,
one way or another. So there's no point, hoping that it's going to go away and that these nasty people will go away. They're not. They're part of the scenery, and they are changing too. So that's, that bit is easy.
Fantastic. Now, I know it's still early in your trip here, and you're going to be heading down to Mindanao to meet with the MILF. But in terms of the Philippines and going through what you've gone through, we have a framework agreement. It's historic for us. The next steps. What kind of, I guess, words of advice, if you have any?
Well, actually, the framework agreement sets out your next steps, which are taking place. Are taking place in Kuala Lumpur.
Started this week.
Yes. Right. And the steps after that will be putting in place the mechanism that people are going to drive the transitional arrangement, the people who are going to draft the basic laws, and then the question, once the basic law goes through Congress, of then implementing that. So the steps are there.
Right.
There are issues which at the moment aren't clearly resolved, but again, one will just look to see what the nature of that issue is. That what the overall content, the framework within which you're operating.
Yes.
And so it will get consistently easier. The steps up to here were difficult, but
yes,
the steps on, which may be, there will still be difficulties, and they may still take some time.
Yes.
And they might even, we had a situation where we had a hiatus of several years,
yes,
when the process collapsed, and then it came back again,
yes,
after
yes,
it. But what we had was something that reflected the realities of our situation. I think the framework agreement reflects the realities of the situation here. So the remaining problems will be worked out. They just might take a bit longer than planned.
Are there any potential landmines you could say we should try to avoid?
Well, I'm not in the best position to say that, because I don't know the situation in detail.
Right.
There's no point saying, well, we had a problem with this, so maybe you're going to have a problem too. I don't think it
right,
necessarily works like that. So you've got to look carefully at the particular situation you have to
yes,
work out what are the problems here.
During the time when you said you had the hiatus, and there was a period of time when it looked like the Middle East process was going to move forward better than the peace process you were going through. I mean, how did you get through those tough moments?
Well, it's just a simple thing that there was no alternative.
That's what kept you committed to peace.
Well, it's, yeah. Or you put it right another day, it's remarkable what you do when you have to do it. What you can do when you have to do it.
But it took a particular set of men in a particular time. I mean, 30 years is a long time before you came up with the first agreement, and then the process still continued after.
Yes, but it's probably more of a problem getting all the context right. It wasn't just having one or two individuals. We had to get all the major players in the same ballpark.
Yes.
And to do that within a benign context. So it sometimes takes a long time before you get before that happens. And that happening at any one particular time will probably depend on chance factors.
Gosh, I hope the stars align then for us. I have one question from social media at WebStalker. Are you only focused on the MILF in Mindanao? Are there any other groups to deal with?
Oh yes, there are. You mentioned yourself the earlier agreements, and there's still. The earlier agreements are still there.
Yes.
This agreement builds on those earlier agreements, but the elements that are in the earlier agreements are still there and have to do it. Then there are existing power structures within that area which will be affected by the proposals within that. So there's a lot more than that. The present agreement is one that's done between the Philippine government and the MILF, but it's quite clear from that agreement that it recognizes there is a wider context.
Fantastic. Any last words, David?
No, I'm always talked out.
Oh, no.
So many
Well, thank you.
meetings.
Thank you so much. It's actually, the citations I've read about you now say that you really were a model of leadership, that the Northern Ireland peace process was a model for conflict resolution. I know when we were looking at different options, on the peace panel side, they did look at what you did. So thank you. Right from you, we hear. Thank you for joining Talk Thursday. We've been speaking with the Right Honorable Lord David Trimble, 1998 Nobel Peace Prize awardee, for his work on the Northern Ireland peace process. He's in the Philippines this week. He's going to head down to Mindanao to talk to the MILF. Peace process continues. I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for watching Talk Thursday.